Welcome back for Module 7 of our Global Supply Chain Management program, Global Inventory Management. This is Dan Gardner, and want to welcome you to what is going to be an integrating module where we'll be bringing together many of the concepts that we've discussed previously within the context of global inventory management. In terms of our agenda, we're going to bring a definition, set the baseline for our conversation, inventory management defined. We'll talk about strategic considerations within a global context for inventory management. And then we're going to get, as you'll see in bullet point 3, into some operational activities, terminology that you may or may not be familiar with, but will certainly be clarifying. Things like economic order quantity, periodic order quantities, order point systems, safety stock, ABC analysis, cycle counting. I have a lot of information about these points. So if you're not familiar with this terminology, don't worry about that just yet. And as we've seen in previous modules, we also want to establish some key performance indicators, in this case for the inventory management discipline. So this is a pretty busy module full of information. Let's get down to it. So in terms of a definition, I mentioned a moment ago that inventory management really is an integrating function. And the reason why we say that, you'll note from our first sentence here, is that inventory management really does transcend the buy side and sell side of a company's supply chain, meaning the acquisition of raw materials through a conversion, production process, work in process into finished goods. Be that in an outsourced environment where we're using a third party to manufacture on our behalf, or whether we're doing that on our own. We'll have examples of both scenarios, but that's what we mean by transcending the buy side and sell side of a company's supply chain. So things like acquiring raw materials, putting a value on inventory across a supply chain, where we're going to locate that inventory, its storage, usage, ultimately, let's hope, its sale, distribution, and then depending on the type of products that we handle, maybe we have to recover goods out in the field or even dispose of merchandise related to the operation of our business. So at a strategic level, continuing on with our definition, we want to reiterate and emphasize that inventory management really has to be aligned with the firm's organizational, marketing, and financial objectives, those high-level 30,000-foot considerations that we've emphasized throughout all of our modules. Tactically speaking, inventory management is really all about making goods available to customers when they want them and the quantities they'd like to buy via the means they'd like to make a purchase, and of course at a price they're willing to pay. That right terminology, right place, right time, right quantity, right price, etc. Globally speaking, moving on to our second paragraph here, inventory management most definitely has to be enabled by technology. First, for visibility in terms of where goods are, in what condition, in whose custody are this merchandise, that really allows management to make dynamic inventory management decisions. What we mean by that is that although at some point goods across a global supply chain, inventory across a global supply chain is going to be sitting somewhere in a warehouse, that's kind of unavoidable. When we say dynamic inventory management, we're also talking about goods in physical movement, maybe on a truck in China or on a vessel crossing the Atlantic Ocean, or goods waiting to clear through customs. That's what we mean by dynamic inventory management. Not just managing inventory that's sitting still in a warehouse, but goods that are moving constantly. We always want to see our goods moving ultimately into the customer's hands. Ideally, moving into our last sentence here, inventory management software is linked to a company's ERP system, that enterprise resource planning. That's what helps to create the visibility, but also the capacity to make decisions about inventory in that dynamic environment. Perhaps not only linked to an ERP system, but also best-in-breed software, functionally specific software like warehouse management systems and or transportation management systems. So a big emphasis on technology and visibility, but also the tactical aspects of inventory management in a global environment. So we've seen this slide a couple of times now, but just want to reiterate that different industries and business models, how we manage our business, will determine how supply chains are designed and ultimately how inventories are managed. So obviously a retailer in that traditional brick and mortar environment running stores going to have a different supply chain than a manufacturer who is procuring raw materials that goes into a production process. E-commerce, be it business to business and or business to consumer, has changed supply chain management forever and in a dramatic fashion. That's a different situation, a different scenario. Also, whether we are a wholesaler or a distributor, or, as I mentioned a moment ago, a manufacturer, what's sometimes referred to as an OEM, an original equipment manufacturer. If we work in a multi-tiered supply chain, meaning there are many different levels, different tiers of suppliers, that's going to change how supply chains are designed as well. A tier 1 supplier being the entity or organization that sells directly to a manufacturer. A tier 2 sells to a tier 1, tier 3 to a tier 2, etc. That's going to change the dynamics of supply chain. Maybe we're in the agricultural business as either an importer, an exporter, or both. That's an entirely different situation as well. And many organizations don't engage in manufacturing at all. They're more of a marketer and a merchandiser of goods. That's a different supply chain too. So just to reiterate this point, that industries and business models really mold what a supply chain is going to look like. So moving that along, and we've seen this slide a couple of times as well, but just setting that stage again, different types in our title, different types of inventory and operating models also influence how inventories are managed and executed. We've talked about this a couple of times. And again, it's going to depend on what business that we're in. If we're a manufacturer, we're going to be dealing in raw materials, as you see on the left-hand side of our slide here. Could be dealing with components and subassemblies, work in process, goods that have gone into a production environment but haven't been completed yet. Finished goods for sure, most usually represent the greatest dollar value of inventories overall. Distribution inventory, that's goods that are out in our distribution network. And perhaps, depending on our industry, are we selling accessories? We certainly will more than likely need spare parts. And MRO is maintenance, repair, and operations inventory, things like lubricants for machines and things of this nature. On the right-hand side, to bring that story back to life, when we talk about an operating model, this has a very considerable impact on inventories and how they're managed. Again, are we in a build-to-stock type situation where we're working off of a forecast, but putting goods into production and into a storage environment, put it into stock and wait to get customer orders? Or are we only building merchandise or sourcing goods when we receive an order from a customer? So as you can see, build to stock and build to order, very different. Maybe we're assembling to order, which means we have the major components, the subassemblies already put together for a computer, let's say, and then based on specific requirements from a customer, we will assemble merchandise pursuant to those specs. Large projects that require a lot of engineering, perhaps an oil platform or a mining operation, that type of supply chain is engineered to order. Just in time in an automotive, and then VMI, vendor managed inventories, where the vendor, the supplier, is responsible for the vast majority of activities related to inventory management. So to close out on this particular subject, different industries, different supply chains, different inventories, different inventory management tactics. We need to determine what that business model is, what our activities are going to be, and how we decide to manage our inventories within that business model.